multicasting messages. Another pattern for routing is the need to use the scatter-gather router to send a message to each route in parallel and return the collection of all results. And that's what we're going to do in walkthrough 9.2, multicast a message. We'll use scatter-gather to satisfy the need to go out and get all 3 flight services. When we get those flights back from United, Delta, and American, we'll then transform them to bring the collection together into one. And we'll also use DataWeave to sort the flights by price and return them as one solid JSON array. Let's get started. Let's now return to our implementation XML, and let's drag a scatter-gather control element from the palette and drop it at the bottom of the canvas. So we'll go all the way to the bottom, and I will also reset my perspective just to make sure everything's back to the original view here. There we go. All right, so go all the way to the bottom of the canvas, search for scatter-gather inside of here, and drag scatter-gather to the very bottom of these flows. Now from scatter-gather, what we're going to do is change this flow name so that it's representative of what we need to do, which will be to get all airline flights flow. And now what we're going to do is bring 3 flow references into scatter-gather. So let's go to our palette and put in flow reference. And similar to the choice router, we want to see this vertical black bar each time we drag it in. So that'll be 3 flow references inside of scatter-gather. With these 3 flow references in place, let's also set them up to call our respective flows. So the first flow reference we'll call the Delta Flights flow. Second flow reference we'll call the United Flights flow. Third flow reference we'll call the American Flights flow. And then at the very end of this scatter-gather, let's put a logger right outside the scope. This way our debugging process is a little bit easier. All right, now let's go all the way back up to the top of the canvas where we've got the get flights flow. Inside of the default box, we're going to put a call to this get all flights flow. So we'll first select the logger that exists in default and delete it. And we'll put a flow reference in place of that logger in the default scope. Now, if we double click on this logger or flow ref rather, that will get triggered on the default, we'll drop down the flow name and we'll set this to the get all airline flights flow. All right, so now if we call something and don't specify an airline, this should be triggered respectively. So let's go ahead and save up the project. And let's once again run this in debug mode if it's not already. So I'll stop mine just to make sure, and then click debug. Now, we'll go inside of Postman and we'll make the same request we had earlier. That's for localhost 8081/flights. Let's send it in. Back in Anypoint Studio, we'll step through this once again. So we'll move over to our set code subflow, continue to step in and get to our choice router. This time we should end up inside of the default box, and this should send us over to scatter-gather. Now what's going to happen in scatter-gather once again is this message is going to be sent to all 3 destinations in parallel. And then scatter-gather is going to bring the results all together into the message. So if we step forward once again, you can see how it will kind of bounce between these flow refs. And as you step more and more, you'll see it bounce through as these are moving in parallel. Now what we'll do here is just drop a breakpoint on the final logger. That way we don't have to jump around so much. And once at this logger from a debug perspective, we can open up the payload and you'll see that inside of the payload, we've effectively got 3 sets of these weave objects. Now, what we effectively have here are 3 different entities that contain all these flights. And what we're going to do now is we're going to look at flattening these and attempting to bring them all together into one array, because when we get the final JSON together, we're going to want to put this into one flat structure simply containing all the flights, even doing some sorting and things of that nature. So let's now go into our flights flow and add a transform message right before the logger. We'll first send this all the way through just to make sure it makes its way past. Go back to the design perspective, And again, look for a transform message object inside of here. Drag transform message before the logger. All right. And in the properties view of the data weave here, what we're going to do is we're going to put a very simple expression in place that's going to say flatten payload. And this should successfully flatten all of those different routes together into one inside of our payload. Let's click inside of the canvas and save the implementation. And we're going to try to send the same request through inside of our setup. So we'll make sure we have a breakpoint somewhere at this point, and we'll send a request through using Postman. Back in Anypoint Studio, we'll switch over to debug mode as needed, and then step over to our logger. Now you can see inside of here, the result set that we've got are a list of 11 different flights, and depending on your criteria, it could vary, but we can see a payload holding all of these different flight objects inside of it. So we've successfully flattened those together, and in doing so, it's also done a transform so that we can more easily see them. They're not in that main data weave format. All right, so now let's go ahead and stop the application. Well, first, let's send it all the way through, then we'll stop the app. We'll go over to Postman, and in Postman, you'll see this very cryptic response. And this is, of course, because we're not doing anything with that final Java object that we're getting back. The ideal would be to sort it in some way, let's say by price, and then also provide it in JSON format so our client can get it back, just like it would if it was asking for a single airline. So back inside of Anypoint Studio, let's return to our Get Flights flow at the very top here. And let's put a transform message right after the choice router. So go back into the design mode and drag a transform message right after the choice router here. Now let's double click on transform message and let's set this up. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to write a simple expression in here that will sort it. So let's say payload, and you can do control space to bring up some autocomplete. We're going to do order by, in this case, order by we can't autocomplete, so you'll have to type in order by, and then we'll do $.price. So now we're going to take this and order it by the price value. We'll also set the output from a Java object to a JSON object. This way it transforms it appropriately into a JSON format. Now let's see how this works. So we'll save the application up, and let's just run it in normal mode. We won't worry about debugging this time around. All right. Once this starts up, we'll head back to Postman, and using our flights call, let's send it through one more time. And in this case, once it goes all the way through, you'll see all the different flights from the various airlines that satisfy the criteria. So it looks pretty good. Now, if we were to go in here and ask for the airline of United and code of PDF, we can hit send, and then we'll get a response back for this specific airport code. Now let's change it for the Delta request as well, keeping the code as PDF. So we'll go to Delta and hit send. And here we can see when it routed to the Delta, it couldn't resolve PDF. So we got that appropriate no flights to PDF available. Now let's go down and let's keep code, but let's remove the airline specifier. So we're going to do all flights to PDF. And in this case, clearly we still have a bit of an error, because when we call all flights, we should still be able to resolve that United flight to PDF, but it seems like it triggers the exception strategy when one of these routes fails, and that's pretty much the end of it. So let's return to Anypoint Studio, and let's stop the project in Anypoint Studio. And next what we're going to do is debug the project to figure out what exactly is happening here. So let's go ahead and put a debug breakpoint somewhere in the beginning of the flow. So I'll do it on the set code subflow, and then run the project in debug mode. And hit yes. All right, now what we're going to do is in Postman send that same request through, and go back to Anypoint Studio, and we'll use our green stepper here to see where it throws the exception. So we'll step forward. Now we can see the exception is getting thrown from get Delta flights flow. So the other paths could be going through just fine, such as American, such as Delta, or American and United rather, and be resolving to whatever flights they do have available. But Delta is still throwing this exception at this point, and this is what's effectively causing that exception to happen. Now, if you think about what happens here, it's going to get caught in our global exception strategy, and this is going to get written as the payload of no flights PDF. Now, if we go forward a little bit, this will still make its way out of the scatter gather router, which we're then going to try to flatten the payload. So if I step forward through the transform message, we can see inside of here this payload with size 2, where it's got one of the result sets inside of here, but then on that second node, it's got the no flights PDF, which is effectively going to break our structure overall. If we step forward again and then go for our final transformation where we attempt to sort and generate this JSON, it's going to throw an exception on us here because it's unable to resolve that now that that array is the normal object we're expecting plus this no flights error message. So when we step all the way through here and then go back to Postman, that throws an exception itself and gets caught in the strategy. And of course, we just end up with the simple result of no flights to PDF, which is technically not correct in this example. Now we're going to dive in soon here and resolve this as we dive a little bit deeper. But for now, just to get an idea of what's happening in here that's causing this result set to come back. Let's go ahead and head back to Anypoint Studio and make sure to stop our project. Then we'll look a little bit deeper at how to resolve this. Now, before going further, we're actually going to transform the results of our United, American, and Delta flows into a Java object that we can use inside of scatter gather and some of the various areas. This will be kind of like a canonical object that we use, and then we can transform that final result into JSON at the very end of the equation. So to get ourselves started here, what we're going to do is head to the Get United Flights flow and double click on the transform message. Now in the right side here, where we've got the output information, we are going to set ourselves up to right click on list JSON and to clear the metadata from here. Now we're going to define metadata just as if we were from a new standpoint, and we are going to add in a new type. In the type ID box, we'll call this the flight POJO and click create type. From the type dropdown, we'll set this as a Java object. And inside of the data structure area, we can click to select an option. And from within here, let's choose Java object. Now we'll want to know what class we'd like to use, and let's type in flight, in which flight should show up. This is a Java class from our student files that we had dragged into source main Java. So we'll double click on flight and hit select. All right, now with flight in place, we can see some of the mapping showing up in the side here. Now what we're going to do is ensure that the mapping is able to happen from the JSON input. So we'll have to go through and do some remapping for some of these fields. One more thing that we're going to do inside of here is to transform all of the items in United, American, and Delta into Java objects. To do this, let's select the transform message item here. And your transform message for United might look a little bit different than mine. That's okay. For now, we're just going to clear the metadata in the output section to make sure we can completely wipe that out. And then we'll go to the define metadata button. From define metadata, we're going to add in a new metadata that we are going to call flights or flight underscore POJO and hit create type. Now this type is going to be a Java type. And in the data structure box, we're going to select collection and then Java object. So this will be a collection of Java objects. Now that went a little quick. I'll double click on it again. When you click on Java object, it's likely going to pop up a box like this where you'll have to actually specify your Java class. So in this case, we're going to specify flight, and that will be from source main Java, which is effectively a Java class that we had imported inside. All right, so that Java class, by the way, came from our student file, so it's something you would have imported earlier into the project. So it's a collection of com.mulesoft.training.flight. We'll hit select. Another thing I'm going to do is clear out the metadata just so that it starts completely fresh. And we're going to just drag our fields over like we're used to. So airline name, we're going to go over and do price, departure date, okay, plane type, origin, code, all right, and we'll also bring over our destination. Empty seats will be mapped to available seats. All right, and now we've got a mapping set up that is going to take this JSON request and transform it into this canonical Java object that we're going to also do in American. So let's double click on American as well. Once again, if your output area in American looks slightly different than mine, don't worry about it. Just go ahead and right click and clear the metadata on the output with me here. We're then going to define metadata, and we are going to choose the flight POJO that we had set up before that we just used in United. We'll hit select. And then inside of the code here, we're going to just put in some open and close brackets to start ourselves off fresh. And for American, let's go ahead and bring these fields over once again. So code will go to flight code. Price is going to go to price. Departure date to departure date. Origin to origination. Destination to destination, empty seats to available seats. All right. And then plane type we have down here, and that will go, of course, to plane type as well. All right. We'll double click on airline name, and that will put in this field for airline name. And you might recall previously we had statically put in a string. So let's do that once again. The airline name will always be American, so we'll input that as American. All right. Now, one more flow I want to change with you, and this is the Get Delta Flights flow. So let's double click on Get Delta Flights flow. Once again, from the metadata on the right of the output here, we are going to clear that metadata out and define metadata and choose our flight POJO object once again. Inside of our existing data weave code, let's make sure we clear this out so there's not any confusion. And we are going to continue on with these mappings. So inside of here, what we'll do is select our airline name and bring that over. We'll bring our code over to flight code and so on. As you're used to hearing me say at this point, we'll bring each field like for like over. Destination to destination. Empty seats will go to available seats. Origin to origination. Plane type to plane type. Oops, plane type to plane type over here. Okay, price to price. Okay, and then all of our fields are set up as needed. So now we are transforming this into a Java object as we'd expect, and we can set this up to create Java objects as we move through. So if you'd like, you can stop the application here, do a little bit of debugging and just see the objects that it's generating. But in the next section, when we go through filtering, we're going to see how these Java objects can be used to check the type and realize whether we need to filter it out or not.